Writing Out Loud, a program designed to explore in-depth interviews with writers to hear that words have voices. Our hostess for today's program is Teresa Miller, Executive Director for the Oklahoma Center for Poets and Writers at OSU Tulsa.
Hello, everyone. I'm Teresa Miller, and welcome to Writing Out Loud and a very special two-part interview with best-selling author Elmore Leonard. Thank you for being here, sir.
Thank you, Teresa.
Your latest novel, The Hot Kid, is set in 1920s, 1930s Oklahoma. It's your 40th book, and I got to thinking about that. 40 books.
Yeah.
As I look back on your career, did publishing come easily to you? It's hard for me to believe you ever got a rejection slip.
I remember the first book I wrote, my agent, and I had an agent in New York then who's not long after died, and she was sitting with an editor from Houghton Mifflin, and he said, well, I don't know. The book hasn't, I haven't finished the book. And he said, well, I don't know if it's going to work or not. And she said, well, if it doesn't, then I don't know how many books I've sold that were in this same stage, and they always work. There's always a way to end a book. And I've never, ever worried about how to end a book or where the book's going. Because when I started out, I might have outlined a few books back 30 or 40 years ago. But now, I just want to know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And I just make it up as I go along.
Well, that's the fun of it for you, isn't it?
That's it.
You started out writing Westerns. Why that particular genre?
Because I didn't want to just, I couldn't think of ideas. I mean, I could think of ideas that were scenes, but the short stories that I was reading were not about anything. You know, that someone discovers that he finds out who he is, self-awareness kind of things. That I always like to begin, middle, and end in a story.
Right.
To have something going on. And I realized, and I liked Western movies, and discovered that Westerns were very popular in the 50s. And you could sell a Western almost anywhere. Saturday Evening Post, Collier's, and then down through men's magazines, Argosy, and then maybe a dozen or so pulp magazines that were still in business, dime Western, 10-story Western. So I started writing Westerns, and I got a couple of rejections, and then I realized I had to do some research. So I researched Arizona, New Mexico in the 1880s, concentrated on Apache Indians, different tribes, and cavalry. Cavalry was big in the 50s, and so that was it. Then I began to sell.
You mentioned the Apache Indians, and we're going to hold up a copy of the complete Western stories of Elmore Leonard. And as you say, a lot of your stories focused on the Apache. What intrigued you about the Apache tribe?
That the way they dressed more than anything else. They had long hair and a headband, and they didn't wear feathers. They didn't look like the Indians that I was accustomed to seeing pictures of. That they were different. They were completely different, and they were supposed to be very vicious and you know, difficult to live with. And they were always jumping off the reservation and raising hell. And I thought, these sound like good antagonists.
Did you first get acquainted with Apaches as a youngster?
Well, no, not really. I don't remember any movies about Apaches when I was younger. I remember a Gary Cooper movie, The Plainsman, and he was Wild Bill Hickok. And that was about 1939 or 40. And that impressed me. That stayed with me, so that 10 years later, when I decided to write Westerns, I remember the verisimilitude of that, the realism that was in that particular movie. And but the research really helped. You have to know what you're talking about, you know?
We're going to talk about that some more later, too, because I think that is so important. Is it true as a youngster you were particularly inspired by All Quiet on the Western Front?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, it inspired me to write a play, of all things, in the 5th grade. And there was the All Quiet on the Western Front was serialized in the Detroit Times, which is no more, the Times. But I think I was relying more on the movie, which came out in 1930, I believe, and Lou Ayres, and I remember that picture very, very well. And I wrote a scene that a sequence that had to take place in the classroom because I was using the rows of desks for no man's land, barbed wire. And all my friends were American soldiers, and anybody I really didn't know in my room, they were on the other side, and they were Germans. There was one black kid in the school who was in, and happened to be we happened to be in the same room, and I made him a German because I didn't know him very well at all. I was just up from Memphis.
You didn't start out writing full-time, at least not as a professional novelist. You worked as an ad copywriter for Time on a Chevrolet account. How hard was it for you to find time for your personal writing when you were trying to support a family?
Well, it was difficult, and I ended up in the early 50s getting up at 5 o'clock finally, and it took a month or more to get up when the alarm went off at 5. But then I had 2 hours to write before I got ready to go to work. And at that time, I could write a page an hour in longhand and finish up a couple of sheets of paper. And I had to make a rule for myself that I couldn't put the water on for coffee until I started to write.
Wow. And that worked, obviously.
It worked.
What was motivating you, though, Elmore, getting up at 5 in the morning and doing all that hard work before you went on to more work? You had to be driven.
I think two things. The idea of telling stories has always appealed to me. Then the other thing would be to get out of advertising, to get out of that job and be on my own.
Did you write any great lines for Chevrolet?
No, none. I did some testimonial ads, truck ads, and I would get the truck owner to say something. I would be standing around with the truck owner he'd have a truck that he hadn't had the head off for 150,000 miles, and he says, "Oh, that's just a great truck." I said, "Well, say something colloquial about it, He said, "Well, he says, you can't wear the son of a bitch out. You just get tired of looking at it and buy a new one." I thought, that's it. That's an ad. That's an ad. But Chevrolet said, "You don't get tired of looking at a Chevrolet truck." So much for that.
Did you learn anything as an ad writer that helped you as a novelist?
No.
No? Boy, you were quick on the draw with that one. I was going to ask you about Ombre. In what ways was Ombre a turning point for you in your career?
Well, it wasn't a turning point. No, but it was the last Western that I wrote in the 50s. And I got less money as an advance for that book than anything that I had written before. Because they offered me, it took 2 years to sell, and I think I was offered $1,250 advance. Because Westerns were drying up.
Right.
They were all on TV.
Right.
Everybody was watching Westerns on television, and nobody was buying them anymore. So all the pulps went out of business. Saturday Evening Post and Collier's, the best markets, went out of business, and that was it. And I didn't care for anything on any of the Westerns on television.
See, I watched Big Valley and Bonanza, but why did they not measure up as Westerns?
Well, I don't think they were just Hollywood Westerns. All the guys wore these cute little Dale Evans hats, these little pork pie hats, that no cowboy ever wore.
And those killed the Western novel.
Those were they killed the Western novel, and they always had, at least for the first few years, the showdown in the street, where the good guy and the bad guy faced each other. And I wrote 8 Western books and 32 short stories, and I never had that situation because I didn't think it ever happened.
It's a great cliche of Western literature.
Yeah.
But Ombre was a turning point financially for you, wasn't it? Even though you got the small advance, it sold to film. And didn't that work out a little bit better?
It worked out better than 2 films that I had sold before. But 310 to Yuma, I sold that in 53. And that picture was made, I don't know, maybe in 55. But it's still around. It still pops up on television with Glenn Ford and Van Heflin.
That's great actors. Great
Yeah.
actors. When you made the transition in the 60s from writing Westerns to crime fiction, what themes did you carry over into the new genre?
I didn't think that I carried anything over, yet there was, reviewers would see evidence of an influence of the Westerns, you know. And one of the books that I wrote, I'm trying to think of the name, it was La Brava. I thought of it as an Eastern Western because I brought a guy out of Oklahoma who was the Oklahoma wild man, Clement Mansell, and he concentrated on robbing dope houses in Detroit. And I had other characters who were from Oklahoma. There was something about Oklahoma that has always appealed to me.
Well, you lived here for a little bit as a kid.
In Oklahoma City, yeah.
So it made a profound impression on you.
I think so.
How would you describe the quintessential Elmore Leonard crime novel?
Well, it might be the characters searching for a plot, because plot is not my favorite thing to develop in a book. I spend my time with the characters, developing them, trying to make them interesting, and getting characters that I know can talk. If you're a character in one of my books and you can't talk, you're going to get shot early on, or you'll just get dropped.
Do you sometimes regret shooting off one of your characters?
When a fan will write to me and say, "Why did you kill him? It doesn't make sense." And I said, "Well, I didn't think he was going to end up with the girl." And the girl, who was a probation officer, she was the main character, and I thought she could do better than this guy. This guy, he was a detective in the sheriff's department, Palm Beach County Sheriff's Department, and he collected National Geographics. He had them all in chronological order on his shelf, and he had all of his books in alphabetical order. And I would ask older women, say women my age, I said, "What do you think about a guy like that?" And they'd say, "Oh, hey, that's wonderful. This guy lives an orderly life." And then, but I'd ask them younger women, and they'd say, "Oh, I'd keep an eye on this guy," you know. So I didn't think that my character was going to lose much by letting him get shot, or by my letting him get shot.
How real are these characters to you? We were talking at lunch earlier today, and you were saying that none of your characters are based on real people.
No, but they become real. They start out in my mind as types. Then as I get to know them, and as they talk more, they become individuals. And by the end of the book, after I finish the book, I picture them just sort of hanging there, waiting for me to give them a shove, you know, to get them back into action.
Where did you first run into Chili Palmer?
Chili Palmer. There is a Chili Palmer. He exists, and he worked for a friend of mine I went to University of Detroit with, and then 30 years later, I contacted my friend, and he was a private eye in Miami Beach. I contacted him again for some information. I forgot what it was, and because we were in the same sociology class, and walking from one building to the next, every week we had to have a one-page book report handed in, and he never had one. So I would dictate one to him on the way to class, and he got a B in the course. Yeah, and. He had a guy named Chili Palmer working for him. And Chili Palmer did a lot of surveillance, and he was originally from a gang mafia. He was a mafia soldier in New York, in Brooklyn. He wasn't a made man. He wasn't really a member of the mafia because of, he said, tainted blood, because he was part Puerto Rican, and he said Puerto Rican and Spanish. Well, and so he and I became friends. And researched a book in Puerto Rico, and he came along with me and my wife, and we were friends.
Hmm. John Travolta played Chili Palmer in both Be Cool and Get Shorty. And John's a very charismatic kind of guy. When you see a strong portrait of your characters on screen, does that change how you look at them in any way?
When I wrote a sequel to Get Shorty, and coming out of the premiere of Get Shorty, the head of MGM, Frank Mancuso, said, "Do you think you can write a sequel?" And I said, because he liked the picture.
Sure,
and I said,
it's a good picture.
I said, yeah, I don't know why not, but I did write another book first, and then I wrote it, and then and he finally had retired, and we couldn't get the thing going at MGM, and it's Be Cool. It's the one that's out, or was out, not long ago, and which is an entirely different take on that almost same situation. The one was Chili Palmer in the movie business. Now it's Chili Palmer in the music business. But enough changes were made. Greg Sutter, who does my research, reminded me that when I was talking to the director, Gary Gray, we were saying goodbye. He hadn't started to shoot yet. And he said, "Anything you want to tell me?" I said, "Yes." Same thing I told Barry Sonnenfeld before he started to shoot Get Shorty, that when someone delivers a funny line, don't cut to another character to get his reaction, to get him smiling or laughing, because these guys are all serious.
Did they listen to you?
No. but Barry Sonnenfeld did. And, well, Barry knew better.
There have been lots of movie versions of your books.
Yeah.
Which of the movie versions do you think best reflect your work?
Well, say Get Shorty, Jackie Brown, which was Rum Punch, original title, Quentin Tarantino did. And Quentin wanted to buy Rum Punch right at the time that Reservoir Dogs came out. But he didn't have any money. He didn't have any backing, and he was writing Pulp Fiction at the time. So we told him, my agent in Hollywood said, "We'll hold it for you. And as soon as you're famous, then you can buy it," you see. And then after Pulp Fiction, then Miramax optioned 4 of my titles for him. And he chose to do Rum Punch first because when he was a teenager, like when he was, I don't know, say 14, 15 years old, he had stolen a book out of the bookstore with some of the same characters who were in Rum Punch. It was called The Switch, that particular book. And I told him, first time I met him, I said, you know, I talk about this when I'm giving a talk, and I say that you were punished because he was caught. Then you went back and bought the book and so on. He said, "I didn't buy the book. I went back and stole it again." So he had these 4 now. So he did 1, and then he said he wants to do Kill Shot next. Well, Kill Shot, and I think he had a couple of screenplays written because he didn't want to direct it. He wanted to be in it. He wanted to play one of the bad guys.
Yeah.
He wanted De Niro to play opposite him as the other bad guy. Well, I don't know what Quentin does. He goes to Amsterdam a lot. He goes to Amsterdam. I don't know if he likes canals or what. But he goes there, and then he gets involved with helping out somebody else make a movie, and he doesn't stick to doing his own stuff. So that Harvey Weinstein of Miramax gave Kill Shot to John Madden, who had directed Shakespeare in Love. Now, this is a completely different approach.
Oh, exactly.
But and I thought, this is the best news I've heard, because John Madden is good. He won several, the picture won a number of awards, or Oscars, for Shakespeare in Love. I thought, he's gonna know how to do this one. He's gonna, I hope, do it right. So we got the script just about a month ago, And then he came to the Detroit area week before last to look at locations, because a lot of it takes place from Detroit, between Detroit and Port Huron, which is about an hour away, up the St. Clair River. But he's shooting in Canada, and some of it even takes place in Canada, in that area. And I said, and the reason I didn't like what was happening to it originally when Bruce Willis wanted to play the part, Bruce would say, and I didn't want Bruce Willis to do it, so I wouldn't sell it to him. And he said, why? I said, because in the very last sequence, when the woman, his wife in this movie, is dealing with the two bad guys, the climax, you're 750 miles away. And I want you to stay 750 miles away. And he says, oh, come on, we can fix that ending, you know, as if it needed work. But Madden says, well, of course he's going to remain 750 miles away. She's the star. The focus is on her. And he wants Diane Lane to play the character. And he wants Mickey Rourke to play the bad guy, a Canadian Ojibwe Indian hitman. And he wants Mickey Rourke, and he thinks he can. I think he's already got Diane Lane.
Well, you know, there's all sorts of speculation. Your fans on the internet trying to guess who's going to play which role. Do you engage in that at all when you're writing a book? Do you think that it might be a movie someday?
I'm pretty sure it's going to be a movie. Or at least, I mean, I know I'm going to have a good chance of selling it to somebody in Hollywood. But no, I don't think of parts for actors. The only ones I have are, what's his name? Have Gun Will Travel. Remember?
Oh, yes, Richard Boone.
Richard Boone. I used to see Richard Boone, and I would see Harry Dean Stanton. I would see lesser parts played by good actors. And Warren Oates, I would see.
Oh, he was a
Oates.
wonderful actor.
So then a director might, or a producer would call me up and say, what are you working on? What have you got coming out? I said, well, I think I've got one for, say, Warren Oates. And he'd say, Warren Oates? Warren Oates doesn't sell tickets. You know, think of something for somebody else, you know, a star. And because I had never pictured stars in these roles.
Because your characters aren't stars.
Because, exactly. Exactly.
That's well said. You know, we've focused so much of our interview on how prolific you've been. Have you ever had any dry spells as a writer?
No. Well, I don't believe in, what's that term, that writer's block.
Yeah, because I was talking to you earlier, and I said, you know, Elmore, I've had writer's block. And you said, hey, don't even acknowledge it.
No, I don't believe in writer's block or that coffee will keep me awake at night.
What would you say to young writers out there, and we were talking about this earlier as well, that they get discouraged because they hear there are very few opportunities to get your work published these days? What would you say to them if they have the love for writing you did as a young writer?
Well, you've got to do it all the time. You've got to put it first. You've got to study what you're doing so that within a certain number of years, anyway, 10 years, you've developed your own sound, your own style, your own voice. And my style is an absence of style. My style is not intruding. Never. I don't want the reader to be aware of me writing. If it sounds like writing, I rewrite it. To make it, I try to avoid what we learned in composition class in school. Upon entering the room, he sent, things that sound like writing.
Yeah. You've actually come up with 10 rules for writing.
Yes, I have.
What's the single most important one to pass along?
The most important rule, I don't think it is one of the rules, but it's try to leave out the parts that readers tend to skip.
Do you still have to work on those kinds of things?
Yes, definitely.
Even as a veteran writer?
Like exclamation points. I say, be judicious about using exclamation points, that you're allowed 3 per 100,000 words. And that would be it, you know.
What's another rule? I know one of them is not to begin with the weather.
Mm-hmm. I think one of the most important rules is never use a verb other than said to indicate dialogue, and never use an adverb to modify said.
Did these rules just come to you all at once, or did you learn them over the process of years?
No, they came over the years. Over the years, yeah. But back in 55 or 6, Steinbeck wrote a book called Sweet Thursday.
Right.
And in the prologue, and one of my rules is avoid prologues. You don't need, all a prologue is backstory. You put that in anywhere. Avoid prologues. But in one of his characters says, I don't like the author telling me what the characters look like. I want to get what they look like from the way they talk. And I thought, thank God, I don't have to describe characters anymore, you know. But you do somewhat. But and their mannerisms, and they're the kind of people they are. This is but mainly the way they talk. And learning that was a giant step for me.
We just have a few seconds here, Elmore, and I want to thank you very much for coming and doing part 1 of our interview. In part 2, we're going to talk about your new novel, The Hot Kid. And thank all of you for joining us on Writing Out Loud.
Jackie Cooper Volvo supports numerous community projects and is proud to be a sponsor of Writing Out Loud.